So these are the city's brand new $700,000 crime-proof subway gates, which criminals can no longer hop over. Let's see them in action.
Watch to the left of your screen, and it's 5 for the price of 1 as passengers scurry into the subway behind a single paying customer.
Oh no.
The MTA has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on these new subway platform gates.
Our cameras seeing a lot of people today running past the gates. They're skipping their fares for a free ride.
You've heard of people stealing cars for joyrides, but what about a subway car?
Police say on Saturday the suspects entered a vacant R train and drove it onto train storage tracks.
So we now know that a total of 24 people have been injured.
Some people were trying to open the doors to pry open and just jump on the track themselves, so we were trying to calm them down.
But it begs the obvious question, just how easy would it be for anybody to take a subway car for a joyride?
So these new subway gates are incredibly controversial, and with a price tag of nearly $1 million, for them to perform at a level below what was advertised when they were probably sought out and purchased is not something everybody is 100% on board with. Also, this gate array only exists at this one part of this one particular station. Not all of the gates here use this technology, and that's likely because outfitting a station like this with these gates at every single entry point would cost millions. And although they were touted as evasion-resistant gates because someone cannot jump over the gate, they unfortunately have other weaknesses customers have learned to exploit. But today, there is a very strong police presence here, so I don't think anyone's gonna jump in or sneak in. They'll get caught. At least, that's what I thought. But then these two people right here decided it was worth the risk to try and get a free ride, even with half the police force in attendance. And now they are getting a ticket for fare evasion. But it's hard to justify a massive expenditure on something that doesn't do everything it claimed to do. And what's strange about these is the MTA has used other types of gates that were actually more secure and more crime-proof in the past, but they're phasing them out. And in addition to testing those out, we're gonna see how this past week criminals illegally broke into the subway and drove the trains, and how a train derailment that happened just a few days ago proves that the subway really needs help and bad if it's gonna survive. But in order to understand what a big deal a crime-proof subway would be for New York City, it's important to realize the city loses $690 million a year to fare evasion. And that's why the subway has so many problems. That's why it's falling apart. That's why the trains are old. That's why it looks and feels maybe kind of unsafe at times. Trains suspended, trains rerouted. On average, trains run on time about 84% of the time. There's a 16% chance your train is probably late. And fare evasion threatens the subway to a point where if it's not stopped soon, the entire system could collapse.
So the question, does it make a difference? Our cameras seeing a lot of people today running past the gates. They're skipping their fares for a free ride. News 4's Andrew Siff got a look for this.
So it seems like, unfortunately, that this valiant initial attempt at crime-proofing the subway is amiss. Because although you can now no longer jump over these gates, people have discovered other ways around them, which nobody saw coming when these were designed and built. First of all, it seems like the gates stay open for enough time for several people to go through when one person pays. Now, the current style of subway gates uses a rotating turnstile design that only one person can pass through at a time when it's been activated by someone paying the fare. But those, unfortunately, have a design that people can easily jump over. But believe it or not, these gates have another glaring weakness that has to do with how sophisticated they are.
Now watch this woman put down her big box, which inadvertently opens the sensor gate. But the MTA says don't be fooled. For most riders...
Did you see that? That looks like a design flaw. And it has to do with the position of the sensors on the gate. As you can see, the exit sensors are within reach of somebody who might be on the payment side of the gate, and they could reach over and activate it. Obviously, today's the wrong day to do something like that because we've got a heavy police presence here. But what that basically shows is that there's no way to roll these things out system-wide and have people not try and take advantage of the difference in security. But can you believe that? $700,000, and they have a vulnerability where you can reach over and activate the gate and then pass through. Now, my guess is that to save money, this is shorter than it probably needs to be. That should probably be about half a foot or so back. If the gates were longer, the sensor would activate at a point where no one's arm could reach. Now, the older turnstiles don't have this issue because their rotating design freely rotates in the opposite direction so anyone can leave, but again, they only rotate mechanically when someone pays once. This new gate design does have some advantages over the older turnstiles, and And before we go over what those designs are, it's important to understand that this new gate is similar in style to what other parts of the world use in their subways. Now in Japan, the world-class Osaka subway has a gate design that's similar to this. You put in your ticket and the doors slide open and you can go through with luggage, with something very large. So it's the same concept at play, with two major differences. Number one, the gate's design is slightly different, but every station has a police officer. You're also being recorded, and on top of that, Japan has a 99% conviction rate for prosecuting crime. Here, things are a little different. But the big question here is that now that the city's realized it takes half the police force to police this one terminal because of this new design, is the city happy with its $700,000 purchase?
We're learning, and I'm learning with our customers. I wanted to see how the customers were going to utilize that gate, good and bad.
I appreciate his positive demeanor. But he does make a good point. It's important to see what happens with a gate like this once it's up and running. Otherwise, how else is the city going to realize what works and what doesn't work? On top of that, this new design does have a lot of benefits. And that's because here, more than most other stations, we're by a place where people are bringing heavy suitcases. And that's because this station is near the airport. And what do people have on their way to the airport? Heavy, rolling luggage. The old gates will not let you bring suitcases into the train, but these gates do. And what about families with kids?
I love it. I love it.
But officials acknowledge fare beating has become an epidemic.
Now, as a parent who has carried many a stroller over a subway gate, upstairs, an accessible station with a gate and everything you need, that's a wonderful thing, let me tell you. And what's also interesting is that even though this new design of gate might make fare evasion easier, paid ridership is actually up at this station by 20%. But the problem is that losing $700 million a year is not exactly a great way to run a successful subway. And the MTA's critics say the city is wasting money on expensive pilot programs like this that don't actually accomplish anything, especially when the city already has evasion-resistant gates that have been around for decades, but are being phased out. You see these bad boys right here? These are the old school Iron Maiden gates, and they're in the exact same station where the fancy new crime-proof, not really, gates are. And just like a real Iron Maiden, these are 100% evasion proof. But these gates kind of have the opposite design philosophy of the new fancy gates you see over there in the distance. Two different schools of thought we're looking at right here. And before I explain what those are, look at how solid this is. It rotates freely so that anybody can get out, but if you want to go the other way, look at that clearance right there. It's stuck. That is like half an inch. Not even. There's no way you're gonna squeeze through this thing. But sadly, as crime-proof as these might be, they're also somewhat rider-proof. Everyone with luggage is coming and going through these other newer gates. The only folks interested in using these aren't people who are carrying anything substantial. In fact, this particular design is even less accessible than the old flippers right here. These things are easier to navigate. You could slide a small suitcase under it if you needed to. And what's interesting is we're at a station that has all three types of gates still in use, and the gates that get the least amount of action are the gates which are so crime-proof, nobody can use them. Like, look, everyone's avoiding them. People are just going through the turnstiles, walking right past these. And you know, there's a lot of similarities between these gates, which are very hard to use, and drugstores that are now locking up pretty much everything behind the glass box. Yes, the store will open it for a paying customer, but it's such a pain in the neck. And even though these gates are pretty much 100% crime-proof, the emergency exits, on the other hand, are not. And a lot of times, customers in a busy station will decide to come out of the emergency exit rather than struggle with these gates just because it's easier. And when that happens, people will use the emergency exit gate as an emergency entrance gate and get in for free. And at the end of the day, the venerable Iron Maidens, they are not ADA accessible. Also, in the event of a fire, this could confuse people or make it difficult for people to leave the station if there's some sort of emergency. A whole bunch of people just went in without paying right through that gate. And look, now they're walking right past the police who are watching the fancy gates. So just now as I was standing here, 2 people jumped and several people went out of the emergency exit and other people went in. There was a whole lot of commotion here, and it's just an unmonitored environment. And that's the real problem here. And because the subway is unmonitored and not crime-proof just yet, it's actually experiencing much larger problems than fare evasion, as you're about to see.
This is a world record.
be your cue to get off the train. But police say the suspects seen here in this surveillance video took it as their cue to go for a spin.
I want to assure folks.
Wow. So before we continue with the story, just ask yourself one question. The people who did that, do you think that they paid money to get into the subway and then did that? Or do you think they were already in the train station without paying? It's a valid question because studies show people who don't pay to use the train have a higher likelihood of committing a crime once inside than an actual paying customer. Another way of saying this is that if people are paying to use the train, their likelihood of committing crime while inside drops.
Police say on Saturday the suspects entered a vacant R train and drove it onto train storage tracks. Nothing was damaged and nobody was hurt.
Wow, so these people, they must have only partially turned to the dark side because a true maniac would have crashed that train into something. But what's incredible about this story is the total lack of security around such a critical piece of infrastructure. Millions of people ride the train. Yes, it's falling apart and it's kind of gross, but that doesn't mean you can't keep an eye on it. Yet here we learn the hard way what happens when no one's watching and troublemakers are inside the subway. And you know what the scariest thing about this whole story is? The people who broke into the trains and drove them, they haven't been caught. They're still out there.
Wake up! It's New York. Wouldn't you need, like, experience driving a train?
I don't understand how they left it unlocked and they managed to just drive the train like that.
So as you can see, this is a public relations nightmare for the MTA who operates the trains. And the next time you're on a train and it's moving, how do you know the driver wasn't just one of your fellow passengers? And if the city wants to encourage riders to come back and start using the trains more often, they've got to step things up. Because the idea of an unauthorized person driving something like a train with thousands of people's lives in their hands, that's scary. And the people who ride the train, they just want to get where they're going. They don't want to have to worry about who the driver is. And what's even worse is the city's not telling us how these individuals gained access to the driver's seat of a train, which is supposed to be locked.
The MTA says the illegal joyride was discovered by tower operators and would never have made it onto active tracks, saying the suspects may have used a stolen key.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the words may have, I can replace those just as easily with may not have, which means the city really doesn't know what happened. And that should alarm people, because if the city doesn't know what went wrong, they have no way of guaranteeing future passengers on other trains that they can keep them safe. And unless the MTA does something to increase security, this sort of thing could happen more often. But joyrides are actually the least of the city's problems related to trains right now, because over the last 2 months, there have been 2 high-profile incidents at busy stations like this, one of which was a train derailment. Now, the next incident we've got to talk about happened right here in this train station, the Times Square subway station. This is the first train derailment in a long time.
The 2 trains wedged together and off the rails. How they ended up that way is now the focus of the investigation. One train was empty and being moved.
Now, when something like this takes place, it terrifies everybody and it causes massive delays, because if there's a problem at this station, every other station down the line is also going to get backed up, and that's exactly what happened here. According to local reports, 26 people were injured and 300 people had to be evacuated from one of the trains, and another 300 to 400 had to be taken off of trains that were in the system behind the collision. And the federal government is actually investigating the New York City subway because of this incident and another incident 37 days prior, where someone was tragically injured who worked for the city subway system. And it remains to be seen what federal investigators are going to discover.
Take a look. This is video. It is packed down there with commuters trying to figure out what is going on. Some just didn't even know what was happening until they got down there and saw the...
This is just absolute chaos, and it's a sign of a poorly managed, poorly run operation. That's what it is. The reason the federal government's involved is because even with all these cameras, the city doesn't have a satisfactory explanation for why these accidents keep happening. But luckily, one of the trains involved in the accident was empty because it was out of service. Had it been full, the damage could have been much worse. But the reason it was out of service is because someone had pulled the emergency cord on the train. And since there was no emergency, vandalism is the likely culprit. And apparently this happens all the time. People pulling the emergency brakes just to see what'll happen. It's really sad.
I didn't know what was going to happen next. I saw smoke.
and I just got really nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if it was an attack. I didn't know what. I saw smoke.
And you see those signals down there? Those are red signals. No train that sees that is supposed to move down this track. But apparently the train that had people in it had a green light to proceed, and the train that was being worked on had a red signal, so it shouldn't have been moving, but it was. And the only people on that train were the workers who were resetting the brakes, because whenever the e-brake gets pulled, it's an arduous reset process. They gotta check the whole train, find out what's up. But the point is, that train shouldn't have been going anywhere. The workers should have known what was up, but it still moved. Right there, we have ourselves a flashing green signal, and we have a train safely pulling into the station. This is how these things are supposed to be operating. But if something does go wrong in a train like this, it's not like an airplane where they have a flight data recorder that tells you what's going on. These don't have any kind of system like that. On top of that, most of the cameras in these stations, they might be here where there's a platform, but apparently there aren't cameras in the train tunnels. So after a train leaves the station, you can't really see what's happening to it, which is a big problem because this entire system is 119 years old and it's literally falling apart around us. And as the system continues to age, problems like this could unfortunately become more common, especially if they aren't repairing it. But the big question is, if subway crime is the reason the subway is losing so much money, that the trains are now unsafe and all these accidents are happening because things are just out of control, what can they do to stamp it out and get rid of it? And as we saw with the futuristic gates, the MTA's problem is very human in nature. And no matter what system exists for stopping unauthorized access to any part of the system, without people checking up on that system, some folks are gonna try to get around it. And there's no way anything can be 100% secure. Speaking of which, you see this gate right here? I saw a guy stretch something through here and activate the emergency exit to be able to then open it. Like, look, that's a pretty big gap right there. You can get your hand right through. I bet you nobody knows about that. Or if they do, fixing it is not exactly top priority. And what this probably means is that more police are the answer. But New York City's in the middle of a budget crisis. And the city has actually stopped hiring new officers, so extra police resources might not be available. That's why a crime-proof gate is such a big deal. But if that gate needs police, how is the system going to police itself? Got someone crawling under right there. Even the most secure gate we have, the Iron Maidens, don't work because look, right over there, there's an emergency exit. Maybe part of the problem is that fare evasion won't wind you up in jail anymore. It's just a ticket. Now, we did see people getting tickets earlier, which will probably make them think twice before doing it again. But some people say the soft on crime approach in the subway system makes it dangerous and increases fare evasion. And that's why some people think New York's answer to subway crime is harsher penalties for those who evade fares. I don't know if that's necessarily the right solution, but you can bet if people were spending a night in jail because they hopped and got caught, word would get out pretty quick that it's not a good idea. What do you think the city should do to crime-proof the subway? And should they raise the penalties for fare evasion? Would that help? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.